The man you currently see on screen was named Ray Rivera, and he disappeared on May 16, 2006. He was born on June 10, 1973. Ray and his wife lived in California before moving to Baltimore, Maryland in the mid-2000s, where Ray worked as a writer focusing on finance. His employer was actually a longtime and dear friend of his named Porter Stansberry. However, Ray ended up quitting this position and found work with another subsidiary of the same company that Ray's friend owned, this one being known as Agora Publishing. But one day, Ray just went missing. His friends and family spent a week looking for him, and they did indeed find him. However, not in an ideal state. So it was the 16th of May, 2006 when Ray's wife Allison returned home. She was surprised to see that Ray was nowhere to be seen. She called out to him and searched all over but couldn't seem to find him. At the time, the couple was letting a friend named Claudia stay over, so Allison went over to her and asked if she knew where Ray was. According to Claudia, Ray left earlier in the day and he seemed to be rather angsty and was in a rush. Allison asked Claudia if she had any idea where he went, and she said no. But he did take a phone call before leaving, which seemed to be what prompted him to leave in the first place. While she was confused, Allison didn't think much of this and decided to just call it a night, expecting Ray to show up the next morning. However, when he didn't return home the next day, Allison suspected that something bad had happened and rushed to call police. Allison reported Ray missing and informed authorities that he may have met up with someone that was involved in his disappearance. Both authorities and Ray's family spent the next few days searching for him. But it wasn't until about a week later when Ray's family found his car, a 2001 black Mitsubishi Montero. It was parked outside of the Belvedere Hotel. Believing that Ray was somewhere nearby, possibly in the hotel itself, his friends started searching the area. They informed the hotel staff that they were looking for a missing person named Ray Rivera and asked if they had seen him. The staff said no, but allowed them to search the hotel if they liked. The friends accepted and eventually found themselves on the roof of the building, and it's here where they found a vital clue that would ultimately lead them to Ray himself. On the roof of the hotel, the friends could see this hole on the ceiling of a lower level of the hotel. Police were contacted and staff showed them to the room in which the hole was made in, and that's where they found Ray's decomposing body. This room was typically reserved for groups that used it for large meetings or conventions. Due to the level of decomposition, officials determined that Ray likely died the same day that he went missing. His body had also sustained several brutal injuries as a result of falling from the hotel roof. But that begs another question. Investigators wondered to themselves if Ray had fallen accidentally or if he had intentionally jumped off. The distance from the very top of the hotel and this conference room was about 14 stories, but the strange detail was that there was this gap between the edge of the roof and the location of that hole. This gap was 45 feet. Investigators were puzzled because Ray would have needed to run at a certain speed that should not have been possible to attain due to the size of the actual roof. There just wasn't enough space for him to build up to it. Additionally, let's say Ray somehow did reach the needed speed to cross the gap. Well, he was wearing sandals, which made it even tougher to believe that he could actually make the jump. The scene of the death was just really bizarre and had a lot of investigators confused. Allison immediately went back to her friend that was staying over and asked her if she knew who had called Ray when he ran off. But Claudia had no idea who was on the other end. Allison informed police about the phone call that Ray had received, and after digging into it, they were able to track it down to Agora Publishing, Ray's place of employment. However, they could not determine who actually made the call. But back to the hotel and Ray. Several of his items, including his phone, were in very good condition. Being that Ray's phone was not found in his pockets or anything and instead on the floor, people expected it to be bashed up if not completely destroyed. Medical officials added that Ray's injuries did not reflect the manner in which he died. They were actually much more similar, if not identical, to injuries that would have been caused by a car, which at first I thought would have been indistinguishable from colliding with a hard surface, but I guess to a trained eye there is a difference. Investigators contacted Porter Stansberry himself and ran him through a series of questions. Here we learned that Porter had taken most of his employees on a sort of group trip during the period in which Ray disappeared. Nevertheless, there was some suspicion that Porter was possibly involved, as he immediately brought on lawyers to deal with the matter of Ray's death. This in itself isn't all that suspicious, as, regardless if you're innocent or guilty, having legal advice in such a situation is very important. But what does make it seem a bit suspicious is that Porter issued a gag order on all of his staff, meaning that they were forbidden to talk about the case. But Porter continues to argue that he had nothing to do with Ray's death, and investigators failed at locating any concrete evidence that would suggest Porter was involved. Allison later recalled that one day Ray had encountered someone while the couple were out. Ray and this mystery man had a brief conversation which seemed to make Ray uneasy. He never revealed to Allison what the two discussed, but it's possible that this other person played a role in Ray's death. There's also this eerie note left behind by Ray. It was attached to his computer and it's a little tough to read, but parts of it said the following: "Brothers and sisters, right now around the world volcanoes are erupting. What an awesome sight. Whom virtue unites, death will not separate. I stand before you, a man who understands the purpose and value of our secrets. That's why I cherish them as secrets. That was a well-played game. Congratulations to all who participated, but it was time to wake up. So here I am. Life is a test to see if you can control your spirit. Take care and enjoy the festivities." The note also had a list of movies, and to my knowledge, there isn't a super clear version of the note available to the public, hence why it's a bit tough to read. Other portions of the note read, "I took on the endeavor to find the truth, but not for its own sake. In accepting this quest for the truth, I hope to make myself, with the help of others, into a man worthy and ready to receive it. Members of the council, please note that I will lend careful concentration to the traditional responsibilities. In light of those proceedings, I will satisfy the standard request of this council within the appropriate time." Instantly, people began to think that this note contained some sort of clue. Some believed that the way the note was configured spelled out help, but there seems to be some pushback on this theory. It's also possible that Ray hid other clues within the note as well. Another theory suggested that the note had something to do with the Freemasons. Internet investigators considered this as a result of the language Ray used in his letter. Furthermore, Allison shared that Ray had actually purchased a book called Freemasons for Dummies. Other members of Ray's family, including some friends, also mentioned that he seemed to have this fixation on the Freemason secrecy. Then there's also the theory that this note is nothing more than some random thoughts he had for a project he was working on. Remember, Ray was a writer and he liked to explore his creative sides at times, so this is definitely possible. But when authorities took the note to analyze, they actually said that they believed Ray had schizophrenia or a bipolar disorder. His death was ultimately concluded to be as a result of having a mental breakdown. However, Ray's family said that he didn't exhibit any signs of such mental conditions and his life was good. There was seemingly no reason for Ray to end it all, which obviously leads to the possibility of murder. There's a lot of mystery surrounding the phone call as well as that strange person Ray encountered in public. The ivory-billed woodpecker is one of the largest woodpeckers in the world, and for the rest of the entry, I'm just going to be calling it the IB woodpecker. But as a result of their habitats being destroyed over the past couple of centuries, their population has seen a decline. In fact, in recent decades, the IB woodpecker was believed to have been extinct. However, this may not be the case. In the mid-2000s to early 2010s, there have been several reported sightings of these birds. One such sighting occurred in the eastern half of Arkansas in 2004. There was even a study that was published in 2017 where a bird researcher named Michael Collins shared that it is possible that this bird is still roaming Louisiana or Florida, specifically in the more swampy regions. From 2006 to 2007, Michael Collins shared several photos and videos with what he believes may be the IB woodpecker. Now, the actual videos that he shared are pretty blurry and just a bit tough to make out, but according to Michael, the movements of the bird he saw strongly resemble that of the IB woodpecker. If you do want to check out the video for yourself, I will link it in the description. The results of Michael's research is not exactly convincing amongst other experts in the field, so there is still a significant amount of discussion revolving around whether or not the IB woodpecker is truly extinct. If you're like the millions of people around the world that has caffeine in their daily life, check out partner of the channel, Gamersupps. They have a wide array of amazing flavors, and each serving is less than 40 cents with my code DLAM, which gives you 10% off your order. Some of my personal favorites are Titty Milk and Guacamole Gamer Farts. It also supports the channel, so if you're interested, check out the first link in the description. Now, back to the video. This is a pretty popular topic that has been covered quite a bit already over the years, so I won't be spending an excessive amount of time here. I'm sure 99% of you have seen the Jeff the Killer image, and to this day, it still kind of freaks me out. This image first saw popularity when the creepypasta involving the character made its rounds on the internet. The creepypasta story can be dated back to around the late 2000s to early 2010s, and the jarring nature of the face made it a go-to for people making jump scare screamer type videos. But one day, someone asked the question, where did this image come from? It's obviously heavily edited, so internet sleuths started digging trying to find the original image. And over the years of this investigation, there have been many hoaxes, lies, and the sorts. So there was a YouTuber who created a video on Jeff, and the video was very successful, especially for the time. This YouTuber was named Sasur, I believe is how you say it, and initially he claimed that the JTK image was actually of himself, but this later turned out to be a lie. The image was later traced to a Japanese website named fileman.n1e.jp. An unknown user posted this image, which is commonly referred to as JTK1, with JTK2 being the version that most of you are probably familiar with. The original JTK1 image was accompanied with a caption reading "A celebrity before plastic surgery," and the post itself was titled "Fear of Summer Nights." And of course, those are just the English translations. But further investigation led to people finding this JTK1 image on other Japanese sites. These other sites led investigators down some interesting rabbit holes, but to sum it all up, none of those particular routes led to the original image. Based on what I could find, it seems that as of right now, the best lead people have is of a woman referred to as Mariko. This lead begins in 2023 with a Discord user known as Eat Raw Skin. This user was on a website called gazobox.com, and after exploring the site for a while, she stumbled upon pictures of Mariko. The image you are seeing on screen right now has many similarities that people find strikingly similar to the JTK1 image. And once you dig deeper into this Mariko character, you quickly realize that she has a very interesting past. You see, Mariko is referred to as an idol, or specifically an internet idol. Some of you may be aware that the term idol in Asia comes along with this specific quote-unquote manufactured appearance. But when it came to Mariko, the term idol had a much more distasteful meaning. To me, it basically sounded like she was looked at as a lol cow. Mariko would post photos of herself online, hoping to obtain a certain level of internet fame. And she would get some attention, but this would come in the form of bullying and harassment. Enthusiasts were able to track down the first ever mention of Mariko to a page managed by Mariko's boyfriend, Suzaku Maru. The first post created by him was in April of 2004. Suzaku Maru would upload photos and videos of Mariko and refer to the thread as a sort of fitness journal, as Mariko was trying to lose weight. And I'm not sure if this is confirmed, but it's believed that Suzaku Maru may have created this page with malicious intentions. Suzaku Maru shared the link to the page through various other websites, which led to a slew of hateful comments directed towards Mariko. It's also agreed upon that the couple had a rather heated relationship, which is the primary reason why so many people think that Suzaku Maru created the page in the first place. He just wanted to find more outlets to make fun of his girlfriend. Now, that immense amount of hate that Mariko's page was getting actually led to an attempt of wiping her existence off of the internet, which to an extent was successful. A lot of the information about her that was posted on there is now lost. Many people believe that what Suzaku Maru was doing was unethical and a crime. It is common knowledge to those investigating this that Suzaku Maru had experience with photo editing software. In fact, he often messed around with his Stella's own photos as well as Mariko's. This led to some speculating that perhaps Uzakumaru had a hand in creating the JTK1 image. It was posted about a year after the Mariko page was taken down, so I guess it's possible that the base image was indeed from Mariko, but who knows. This hunt for the original JTK image is really immense, and this particular rabbit hole with Mariko is just one theory. Mutahar, or some ordinary gamers, even set a $10,000 bounty of sorts to whoever finds the original image. Judge Crater, or Joseph Force Crater, was a New York Supreme Court judge before mysteriously disappearing in August of 1930 at the age of 41. He was born in 1889 in Pennsylvania and later went on to study at Lafayette College, then Columbia University. Initially, Crater worked as a law clerk, but later developed into a lawyer with some powerful connections. His career saw significant success, and he was able to lead a very comfortable life. His income, when adjusted for inflation, is a bit under $400,000 per year. In April 1930, Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was a New York governor at the time, appointed Joseph to the New York Supreme Court. And this is where some controversy begins to pop up. There was speculation that Joseph may have paid Tammany Hall, which was known to be corrupt, in order to get his position. Fast forward to August 3rd of the same year, Joseph heads down to New York for work and stays in an apartment. At the time, he was on vacation with his wife Stella in Maine. According to her, Joseph had just received a phone call that made him furious, hence him having to head over to New York. Joseph told Stella that he would be back in no more than 1 week. In his New York apartment, it was reported that he disposed of numerous documents. Then on August 6th, a significant sum of money was withdrawn from Joseph's bank by his secretary on Joseph's behalf. And adjusted for inflation, this sum came out to about $90,000. That same night, Joseph actually met up with a secret lover named Sally. He and Sally went out for dinner with another friend of Joseph's. The group had a great time and spent a couple of hours in each other's company, and later questioning would reveal that Joseph seemed completely normal. Around 10 p.m., Joseph left the group and took a taxi to a show called Dancing Partner, which he had purchased a ticket to earlier. However, Joseph was never seen attending the show, but the ticket was taken. Little did Sally and the rest of the group know that they would be the last ones to ever see Joseph. Several days passed, and by the time 1 week was up, Stella expected Joseph to return to her. But as we know, this never happened. At first, she thought that perhaps something else work-related had occurred while Joseph was in New York, so she waited a while longer. In that time, she also got in touch with some friends and co-workers of Joseph's to check if they had any idea where he was. And once Stella learned that nobody had seen or heard from Joseph since August 6th, that's when she got really anxious. But it wasn't until September 3rd when Stella went and called authorities, and immediately the news spread like wildfire across the nation. There was a massive investigation done on the case, and there was even a $5,000 reward, which again is about $90,000 today. As you would expect with such a high-profile case, there were thousands upon thousands of leads called in, but all of them proved fruitless. Now, back to that earlier detail I mentioned where some believe that Joseph Carter had actually paid for his position in the Supreme Court. Around the time of Joseph being appointed, he had done a combination of withdrawing cash and liquidating several investments. This process freed up over $350,000 in today's money, and where this gets real shady is that there is no record of where this money went. This led many to believe that Joseph used the money to get into the Supreme Court. Additionally, this theory suggests that whoever Joseph had paid off requested more money, which would explain that $90,000 that he had withdrawn. But then this deal went wrong, which resulted in Joseph's death. But of course, that's simply a theory. Stella later requested for her husband to be declared dead in 1937. Joseph had a life insurance policy that later paid Stella out about $420,000 in today's cash. The Maine penny is a silver coin that was discovered in Maine in 1957 and is believed to have been from the 10th century. Due to the location of the discovery, there is speculation that this coin may have been a form of currency. The coin was found in the Goddard site by two archaeologists named Guy Melgren and Ed Runge. Initially, they believed the coin to be from England, however, news of it later reached an expert in London. This expert shared that there was no chance that the coin's origins were from England. It was determined to be a Norse penny that was likely created sometime between 1060 and 1090 in medieval Scandinavia. Where the mystery lies is how the coin ended up in Maine. One theory suggests that the Vikings actually used it in Maine. However, this theory is commonly shot down for a reason I will touch on at the end. There's a Norse settlement called Lance o' Meadows in the northern part of Newfoundland. Some look at this settlement as a potential piece of evidence supporting Viking exploration of North America. Others have proposed that maybe the Vikings didn't actually set foot in North America, but instead traded with others nearby, and that coin eventually ended up in Native American possession in Maine through further trading. The Goddard site itself is known for being a popular location that Native Americans used for trading. This would also explain why so many Native American artifacts were found at the site, but then that coin is the only artifact from the Vikings that was found in Maine. And that's why most people don't really like the idea that Vikings directly landed in Maine. They just never left behind any other items in that location. This entry takes us over to the UK, and there isn't an exact date attached to this mystery, but it's said to have occurred anywhere from the 70s to 90s. There was an urban legend in the UK stating that if you visited a phone booth and called a particular number, you would get a creepy response on the other end. The actual number is said to be 202020, but depending on who's telling the story, the number may be different. A woman would pick up the phone and say, help me, Susie's dying. This phrase would repeat itself over and over. There is a lot of debate on whether or not the phone and phrase were even real, or if this is just some sort of creepypasta. If you go and do some digging on this topic, you're really not going to find too much. One of the cornerstones of the entry is this Reddit post that has been shared around time after time, and I believe this one in particular that I'm going to show you is not the original, just a copy pasta. It's titled Help Me, Susie's Dying, and was created in the r/The Truth Is Here subreddit. Hi TTIH. I was just reading a book of letters sent to 14 Times magazine. People sending in their strange or paranormal experiences. Something in there caught my eye. I think you might like it. These are the letters. Back around 1975, when I was 9, some of the kids I knocked around with insisted we all pile into the nearest phone box to hear a spooky message. By dialing a number, I think it was made up of zeros, twos, and ones, and without needing to insert 2 pence, a woman speaking in a curiously monotone voice could be heard saying, help me, Susie's dying, over and over. Some of the lads said she sometimes said, help me, Susie's drowning, always in the same slow, seemingly bored tone of voice. Was it some weird engineer's test signal, hence no money needed? Rob Dickinson, Worthsthorne, Lancashire, UK, 2000. Letter 2. I can remember once cramming into a phone box in the Stony Holm area of Burnley with various other kids to hear the strange message related by Rob Dickinson. I cannot remember the number dialed. Could this be an early example of EVP, electronic voice phenomenon, or just inexplicable interference on the telephone system, filtered through the active imaginations of young witnesses? Christopher McDermott, London, 2000. Letter 3. I remember the spooky message when I was a child playing with the old red phone boxes in Burnley. 2 phone boxes in particular were prone to mysterious scary voice messages. One at the top of Dalton Street on Plaintree Estate, and the other at the end of Harold Street on Stoops Estate. As I remember, you put 2p in the slot and dialed 20202020, and the voice on the other end would be crackly but audible. Help me, Susie's dying, which would send us kids running in all directions. A.G. Russell Dallimore by email 2003. Letter 4. I am from Burnley and have a vivid memory of the strange phone message. In either 1980 or 1981, 3 other girls and myself were loitering with the intent not to go back to school after lunch. We were messing around in a phone box near to school, calling random numbers and talking rubbish if anyone answered. We thought it was funny. One of the girls said she knew a number you could call to hear a quote-unquote spooky message. I think there were 3s and 2s in it. When she called this number, we all heard the message as quoted in previous correspondence. I have no doubts as to the phrasing of what I heard. It was a clear voice with no audible distortion. Needless to say, we were all a bit freaked out by this, and when a British telecom van pulled up nearby, we made a hasty retreat and returned to school. Tracy McLean, Knaresborough, North Yorkshire, 2003. I'd be very interested to hear if anyone has heard any similar stories about this message. Investigators began asking questions such as if this number worked on all phone booths or only certain ones, and if it was just certain phone booths, why? There was a guy on an online forum discussing the topic. He claimed to have tried dialing the number himself. He said, "I can absolutely confirm that this actually happened. This is how it worked. You would dial a few numbers by tapping the receiver holder, not dialing the number via the dial. You'll then hear a male voice say, 'Start test,' which would repeat until you put the receiver down. The phone then rings, and depending on the test, you'd hear either tones or messages. The Susie message was the only one I could remember, and it actually said in a low female stern voice, 'Susie's dying, help me.' The voice did not say, 'Help me, Susie's dying.'" So, according to this guy, this recording was a test. But even if this was true, then why was this particular line chosen? Pretty screwed up selection in my opinion. Timmothy Pitzen was a little boy born on October 18th, 2004. He grew up in Aurora, Illinois, and was like any other kid, energetic, curious, and he really liked toy cars. However, the early stages of something tragic began on May 11th, 2011. It was a school day and Timothy's father, James, had just dropped him off. Not long after being left at school, around 8 a.m., Timothy's mother, Amy, stops by and picks him up. Timothy and his mother then made their way to a mechanic's shop where Amy left her car. The mechanics offered Amy and her son a ride, and Amy accepted. She ended up taking Timothy to a zoo for about 4 to 5 hours before heading back to the shop to grab the car. Meanwhile, James had returned to Timothy's school to pick him up, so when James never saw his son exit the school, he stepped inside and asked the staff if they knew where his son was. It's here where James was told that his wife Amy had come in earlier in the morning and picked him up. Amy stated that there was some sort of emergency regarding a family member and she needed to excuse Timothy from school. Immediately, James bolted out and started spam calling Amy's cell phone, but as you would expect, she never picked up. James would go on to call police and report Timothy as missing. So far, we have no idea why Amy had taken Timothy from school. Surely, it wasn't just so that the two could go to the zoo, and checking in on a family member was obviously a lie. Amy would go on and take her son to a number of places over the course of 3 days, all of which are locations that would make any child super excited. Places such as theme parks. One of the locations was actually about a 3 to 3.5 hour drive over to Wisconsin, where Amy and her son visited a water park in the Kalahari Resort. And it's at this resort where Timothy was last seen. Around 10 a.m. on May 13th, the 6-year-old boy was seen on security footage checking out with his mother. 2 hours later, around 12 p.m., Amy grabbed her phone and began dialing several family members. However, she didn't call her husband, James. By this time, the rest of Timothy's family was incredibly worried, which Amy suspected. So she kicked off all of her phone calls by saying that Timothy was totally fine, and so was she. One of the people Amy had called was her brother-in-law, Chuck, and what she said is pretty scary. "Tim is my son. I can do what I want. Timothy is fine. He belongs to me." And I understand it's your kid and being protective of them is fine, but the way this sounds makes Amy come across as bat crazy. During a police interview, Chuck stated that he could clearly hear Timothy in the background of the call. Then James was interviewed and he informed police that Amy had this habit of storming off in her car and going on long drives whenever she was angry. He suspected that Amy had become irritated again, but had no idea what may have ticked her off. Additionally, Amy had a constant battle with depression, which has led to instances of her having thoughts. This information, along with that quote Amy said to Chuck, struck fear in authorities. They believed that it was just a matter of time before Amy snapped and did something terrible, not only to herself, but to her son as well. Because again, her son belongs to her and she can do what she wants. Police attempted to trace Amy's location through the calls she made, and they were able to determine that she was somewhere around Sterling, Illinois, specifically in the northwestern region. At about 7:30 p.m., Amy was spotted inside of a Family Dollar in Winnebago, Illinois. There, she bought a few items, including pens and paper. Then she was spotted at a Sullivan's food store, also located in the same city. Fast forward several hours to 11:15 p.m., Amy looked for a place to stay and opted for the Rockford Inn. And it should be noted that whenever she was spotted, she was seen all by herself. Amy got a room at the Rockford Inn and proceeded to jot down a message using those items she had purchased prior before falling asleep. Forever. The next morning around noon, a maid entered Amy's room and discovered her lifeless body along with a note. The previous night, Amy had consumed a large volume of substances and inflicted numerous wounds to herself. However, Timothy was nowhere to be seen. But reading Amy's note revealed that Timothy was safe, or at least that's what she claimed. Amy went on to state that she had left Timothy with people that would look after him and that it would be impossible to track him down. Amy also said that she was sorry for the crazy situation she involved everyone in. The subsequent investigation of the scene by officials also revealed some striking information. Of course, authorities feared that Amy had killed Timothy, so they examined the blade she used and found that it only had her DNA. However, digging through her vehicle revealed a copious amount of Timothy's blood. But there is some debate as to whether or not this blood was from Amy harming her son. Apparently, the boy had a nosebleed in the car not too long ago before this incident. Regardless if true or not, investigators still had a strong suspicion that Amy did something very bad before her death. Many people mentioned that Amy visiting Sterling was strange. She had seemingly no connection to the area, but officials determined that this was not her first time in that city. Amy had stopped by Sterling at least 2 other times in the past. This leads to one theory regarding Timothy, that he was buried somewhere in Sterling. There are some people who believe that those prior visits to Sterling were done to research the location and find an optimal place to hide Timothy. But searches yielded no body, so this is nothing more than just a theory. James also informed investigators that his marriage with Amy wasn't the best. The two had frequent arguments and Amy wanted to cheat on him with her ex. When James found out about this, an insane argument followed, as you would expect. According to James, during this exchange, he told Amy that they would need to divorce if she continued down this road, and a divorce would obviously mean a custody battle over Timothy. Amy probably suspected that for several reasons, including her poor mental health, she would probably lose that battle. This is potentially why Amy took Timothy in the first place. Ultimately, there was no answer as to whether the boy was still alive as Amy had claimed. Then in 2019, the case sees a pretty major story. A young man from Ohio claimed to be Timmothy Pitzen. He was found in Newport, Kentucky and stated that he had just escaped his abductors. When asked his name, he said Timmothy Pitzen, but after a DNA test, it was clear that this was not Timothy. It was actually a 24-year-old named Brian Rinney. Brian later received a 2-year prison sentence for impersonating the boy. If Timothy truly is still out there, he would be 19 years old at the time of this recording. This entry takes us back to June 1989 in Richmond, British Columbia. A woman in her mid-40s named Cindy James was the unfortunate victim of a series of attacks that spanned over half a decade, and tragically, at the very end, she did lose her life. When Cindy was found, medical officials determined that she had died as a result of multiple substance intoxication. Additionally, whoever was responsible had left behind numerous bruises on Cindy's body. Cindy was discovered with her hands and feet bound behind her back. Shockingly, despite the details we just mentioned, the RCMP were of the opinion that Cindy either took her own life or she had died accidentally. This idea becomes even more unbelievable when it was revealed that Cindy had complained about being stalked and harassed by an unknown man frequently in the past. This person had even broken into her residence on multiple occasions, but it seems that officials just ignored these past reports. Cynthia Elizabeth Hack, later Cynthia James, was born on June 12, 1944 in Oliver, British Columbia, into a pretty large family consisting of 2 parents and 5 siblings. Cindy attended nursing school in 1962 and graduated in 1966. She later married a man named Roy Makepeace, but did not have any kids with him. Then in 1982, the relationship ended, and this is around when Cindy started having those strange and creepy encounters with her stalker. According to official records, Cindy made at least 90 reports involving some form of harassment, most of which came in the form of phone calls and messages. At first, Cindy thought that whoever was behind the calls would eventually stop if she ignored them, but this just wasn't the case. Night after night, she heard sounds from men outside her home. Her porch lights were destroyed along with other damage to her property. Even dead cats were discovered in her yard. A friend of Cindy's named Agnes Woodcock also shared that Cindy would receive these cryptic notes made up of cutout magazine letters. Agnes added that she went to visit Cindy in January of 1983, but after knocking several times, she got no answer. Agnes then roamed around the property and eventually found an unconscious Cindy with this stalking around her head in the backyard. Cindy claimed that she had just been jumped by someone while she was in the garage. She didn't get a good look at the man, but he brought her outside where another man then slid a weapon inside of her privates. Cindy of course went to the police many times, but it seemed like whoever was harassing her knew whenever she contacted authorities, so they made sure to punish Cindy even worse whenever that occurred. Understandably, Cindy feared for her life every minute and decided to move homes. Something interesting though is that investigators believe that Cindy wasn't being 100% truthful. Some even suspected that Cindy was doing all of this on her own. And then there were others that believed Cindy was truthfully being stalked by someone and that she knew exactly who the culprit was. In 1983, Cindy moved to West Vancouver, and for a few days she believed that she was safe. But then she got a letter that just sent her back into that pit of dread and anxiety. It said, "Run, rabbit, run. I'll show you how effing good I am. Soon, bang bang, you're dead." This actually caused Cindy to move yet again. The letters and calls continued, and Cindy opted to hire a private investigator named Ozzie Cabin. Ozzie had Cindy carry this radio device that would allow him to listen in on Cindy's day-to-day life. One day in 1984, he heard noises that worried him, so he rushed over to Cindy's home and he found her lying on the ground with a very bad knife wound on her hand. There was also a letter that said, "Now you must die." After taking her to the hospital, Cindy was able to provide details of the man that attacked her. She claimed that the man rushed past her gate and burst into her home, where he smashed an object against her head. As Cindy was losing consciousness, she saw the man poke her with a needle. The following sketch is what officials created based on Cindy's information. And as for that needle, doctors determined that Cindy had no trace of suspicious substances in her body. And by now, I'm sure most of you are likely suspecting that the primary culprit behind the harassment and attacks is Cindy's ex-husband, Roy Makepeace. However, he denied having any sort of involvement. Instead, he suggested that the mafia was actually behind Cindy's attacks. In the middle of June 1984, Cindy's tortures seemed to have escalated once more. Cindy called Ozzie and she was in clear distress. When Ozzie arrived, he found Cindy hiding and crying. He also found Cindy's dog, Heldy, cowering in a corner. Heldy seemed to be too scared to allow anybody to touch her, and Ozzie realized that Cindy's stalker had mercilessly attacked the dog. I can probably go on and on about the specifics of the years that followed, but that would likely take at least an hour or two to cover. So instead, we're going to fast forward to 1989, specifically May 25th. This marked about 6 years since the stalker started contacting Cindy. This is also the day that Cindy went missing. Her friends attempted to find her and were able to locate her car, which was left in the parking lot of a shopping center. Investigators found groceries inside as well as blood. There were also several personal belongings of Cindy's strewn about on the ground underneath the vehicle. Witnesses later reported that they had seen Cindy inside of a grocery store before she went to a bank, where she deposited some cash into the ATM. And suspiciously, just a few days after Cindy's disappearance, there was a call made by a person claiming to be Cindy's father asking for details about Cindy's life insurance policy. The caller was told that such information could not be shared over a phone call, and instead an in-person meeting would need to be arranged. This meeting never occurred, and when police asked Cindy's dad if he made the call, he said no. About 2 weeks later, on June 8th, Cindy's body was found. She was left in the backyard of a long abandoned house located in Richmond. And as I went over at the very beginning, she was hogtied and there were other clear signs that foul play was involved, but the RCMP still were not convinced that this was a murder. They believed that it was much more likely that this was. Thus, the case was closed in July of the same year. Cindy's private investigator Ozzy was obviously not convinced and believed that the scene could not have been staged. Again, Roy Makepeace was suspected of being responsible, but no one has ever been charged for Cindy's death. Back during World War II, when forces held a lot of power, tons of valuables including gold, art pieces, and other artifacts were stolen by them, much of which is now lost. There are many explorers and historians who believe that the stolen treasure was actually hidden in secret isolated locations, which has led to the birth of urban legends focused around said treasure. At the time, the Nazis stole gold from not only individuals, but they also got their hands on the gold reserves held by the national banks, and apparently only about 60 to 70% of all this gold was ever recovered after the war. In 1945, US Army units discovered hidden stashes of loot across Germany and Austria, the largest of which was the Merker salt mine in Thuringia, Germany, which contained gold bullion, coins, and currency valued at $517 million in 1945, which is nearly $9 billion today. That is such an absurd number for one single stash. As Allied forces gained control of occupied territories, efforts were made to return the monetary gold to the countries from which it was seized. However, other recovered treasures were sold and the proceeds were given to organizations established to aid Jewish refugees in the aftermath of the war. There are stories about various officers writing down the locations of these stashes in diaries, but it seems that most of the logs kept by the higher-ups have no such information. Another rumored site of hidden gold was the Walbzik gold train. The train was rumored to be buried inside of a mountain in southwestern Poland, but when explored, no discovery was made of any hidden treasure. The most recent exploration of that particular location occurred in 2016, with nothing to show for it. To this day, there are explorers that organize treasure hunting expeditions revolving around leads that may take them to loot, but needless to say, finding such a stash today is incredibly difficult. Any rumored location has likely been scavenged through, and if there is still treasure out there, it would be in locations that nobody has any idea of. Room 1046 takes us to the Hotel President located in Kansas City, Missouri, where one of the guests was mysteriously found dead in his room. It was January 2nd, 1935, when a man named Roland T. Owen stepped inside of the Hotel President after 1 p.m. He specifically requested that he receive a room that was facing the hotel's inner courtyard. Other guests and employees described him as a man in his 20s or early 30s, and he looked sort of like a brawler. He had what appeared to be a cauliflower ear and a scar on the side of his head. Before heading towards his room, Roland complained to one of the guests about a different hotel he stayed at the previous night. He mentioned that they charged him $5, which was not worth his experience. Roland oddly carried no luggage, but it did appear that he was intending to partake in some sort of important meeting, as he was neatly dressed with a black overcoat. Employees of the hotel immediately thought that Roland was a bit strange. Whenever a maid visited his room, it was extremely dark with only the desk lamp to provide light. One of the maids named Mary claimed that when she went inside room 1046, there was a man sitting in the dark which made her feel uncomfortable. She offered to leave and return later in the day, but the man told her to proceed with the cleaning. Mary took note that the man appeared to be rather agitated. He seemed extremely stressed over something and was careful to always stay in the dark. When Mary asked if she could turn on the main lights, the man yelled no. A different maid was in the middle of cleaning room 1046 when Roland commanded her to not lock the door as a friend was going to stop by in just a couple of minutes. That same maid returned later in the day to inspect the room once more. She noticed Roland lying on his bed fully clothed. She thought that he was sleeping, so she didn't want to wake him, but she saw a note on the desk that said, "Dawn, I will be back in 15 minutes. Wait." The next morning, she walked by Roland's room and overheard Roland having what seemed to be a phone conversation. He said, "No, Dawn, I don't want to eat. I am not hungry." When the maid went to offer new towels later in the day, she noted that there were 2 men inside that room. After knocking and offering towels, one of the men bluntly told her that they didn't want them. This voice was not Roland's. The woman staying in room 1048 right next to Roland's room later informed police that she heard what sounded like several men and women arguing with each other. They were loud and were constantly cursing. She grew extremely frustrated over the commotion and was about to call the front desk, but in the end, she decided not to. Now, it may have been possible that what the woman heard was not actually coming from room 1046. There was a large party being held in room 1055 that same night, which may have been the true source of the noise. The elevator operator also reported some rather odd activities that same night. He remembered taking a woman that frequented the hotel with different men to a bunch of different floors in an attempt to locate a certain client that she described as very prompt. The operator spent over an hour taking the woman to different floors and rooms, but they never located her client. Fast forward to 11 p.m. on January 3rd, a man named Robert Lane noticed someone in the street in front of Hotel President trying to flag down help. The description given by Robert matched up with Roland. Robert also stated that the man was seriously hurt. There was this large gash on his arm, and he suspected that Roland may have also been internally bleeding. The man asked Robert to help him get a cab before saying, "I'll kill that guy tomorrow." The next day, the hotel phone operator noticed that the phone to room 1046 was not hooked, so she asked a bellhop to stop by the room and check on it. However, when the bellhop reached the room, there was a "Do Not Disturb" sign outside and the door was locked. Regardless, the bellhop knocked several times on the door, but no one came out. Then suddenly, someone in the room said, "Come in," and turn on the lights. But again, the door was locked, so the guy couldn't get inside. The bellhop eventually gave up and just yelled, "Hook up the phone," before returning to the lobby. But after an hour went by, the phone was still not hooked up. Another bellhop named Harold Pike was sent to the room to check on the guest again. Harold also received no answer after knocking repeatedly, so he ended up using his pass key to get through the door. When he stepped inside, his eyes immediately moved towards the nude man lying on the bed. Harold just rushed towards the phone and placed it on his hook before leaving and locking the door. Then, just a few hours later, the phone in room 1046 was yet again off its hook. The first bellhop, Randolph, was sent to fix the issue. Again, there was no response from knocking, so he used his passkey to get inside, and this time, he found Roland on his hands and knees just a couple of feet from the door. He went to flick on the lights, and that's when he noticed a massive amount of blood. Roland himself was also in terrible shape. Randolph rushed back to the lobby and called police. When officials arrived, Roland was clinging to life. It was clear that he had been tortured for a prolonged period of time. Investigators estimated that the bloodstains had been there for hours at the very least, meaning that Roland was being tortured well before Randolph's first visit to the room. Shortly after entering the hospital, Roland slipped into a coma. On the way there, he was also falling in and out of consciousness, and when questioned as to what had happened to him, Roland simply said, "I fell against the tub." That same night, Roland died in the hospital. It was only after his death when the hotel employees learned that Roland T. Owen was not this man's real name. police rushed to put out a sketch with the heading, "Do you recognize this man?" Police were able to find the hotel that Roland mentioned he stayed at previously that he complained about, but it turned out that the staff never encountered anyone under the name Roland Owen, but they did recognize the person in the sketch. They stated that this man checked in as Eugene K. Scott. He also shared that he was from Los Angeles. However, there was no information on any men named Roland Owen or Eugene Scott in LA. Within his room, police discovered that all of Roland's items and clothing had also been taken. Again, he didn't bring any luggage, he only had a brush, comb, and toothpaste, but nevertheless, they were all missing. Investigators did find a few items though, such as a hairpin, safety pin, unused cigarette, a bottle of diluted sulfuric acid, and a tie label. There were also fingerprints on the phone, which were initially thought to belong to a woman, but this was later ruled out. They also did not belong to the bellhop that touched the phone. The exact owner of the prints was never identified, and no matter how deep the investigation got, police just couldn't figure out who Roland really was. Then all of a sudden, another strange occurrence took place. Preparations were being made for Roland's burial when an unknown man called police telling them to postpone the ceremony as he wanted to pay for a proper funeral. And shockingly, the funeral home responsible for Roland's burial did receive an unmarked envelope with cash inside. It was more than enough to cover all of the expenses. Additionally, 13 roses were sent to Roland's grave with a note that said, "Love forever, Luis." Then, 1 year later, a random woman encountered Roland's sketch in a magazine and claimed that he was her son. According to her, this guy's name was Artemis Ogletree. The woman said that Artemis left home at the age of 17 in 1934 in order to hitchhike to California, but the man appeared to be much older. Artemis's mother also stated that she received several letters from her son and a phone call from someone claiming to be his friend. All of the letters were from Roland, and the phone call claimed that Roland was in Egypt. The letters were also sent after his death, and down the line, the identity of Roland was confirmed to be Artemis. But even after this revelation, we still have no clue why he was killed or who did it. This entry focuses on a man who robbed about 12 to 14 banks over 5 months in a number of locations. These include Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, and New Hampshire. The actual robberies occurred between September of 2021 to August of 2022. And if you are new to the series, this iceberg is pretty old, so this seems to be one of the mysteries that have since been solved, but I'm still going to be including it here at the end. One of the employees who came face to face with the culprit stated that he approached them with a zipper pouch and a note that said, "I have a gun, don't call 911. Don't set off any alarms." The teller attempted to lie to the man and say that there wasn't any cash, but the thief kept pushing and eventually walked out with several $1,000s. The timeline of events proceeded like this. On September 9th, 2021, $5,000 was stolen from a West Springfield credit union. Then on the 20th of the same month, a credit union in Enfield, Connecticut was robbed of just under $8,000. On October 4th, a bank located in Brattleboro, Vermont was robbed for $11,000. A little over a week later, on the 15th, a bank in East Windsor, Connecticut had almost $2.5K stolen from them. Then on the 21st and 22nd of October, 2 more banks were robbed, or rather one was successfully robbed while the other was simply an attempt that yielded $0 for the thief. The successful operation resulted in over $8,000. Another robbery occurred on November 5th, totaling over $10,000. Then 2 weeks later, another for over $2,000. The very next day, on the 20th, another bank lost $7,000. The next robbery didn't occur for about another 2 to 3 weeks, but this bank lost just under $6,000. The first robbery of 2022 occurred on January 6th, where a key bank lost about $2,000. Another robbery in the same month was for just under $3,000. Then the culprit went on a sort of break. The next robbery was on May 26th, where he stole $7,000. Then in June, we got the largest single robbery in his run, that being $53,000. The final robbery occurred on August 17th, which netted the man $12,000. Investigators were interested in a suspect named Taylor Gchek. Now, I should state that in late 2022, he was simply a suspect and later on, he pleaded not guilty, but I can't seem to find what exactly happened to him in the end. So everything I'm about to share is alleged, I guess. During one of the bank robberies, Taylor took off all of those paper straps that kept the bills together and tossed them in the trash within the bank. Investigators were able to get DNA evidence from those straps. At some point, Taylor visited an MGM casino located in Springfield, Massachusetts. While he was gambling, he purchased a can of Red Bull. After finishing it, he left it on a table and went on his way. Little did he know, he was actually being tailed and observed by authorities. So an official went and took the Red Bull, and after analyzing the DNA on the straw, it was deemed a match to the DNA on those paper straps that were thrown away. Fast forward to December of 2022. Taylor gets arrested and he faces charges of all of those robberies that I just listed. Taylor actually has a criminal history as well. In 2006, he was tied up in an incident where he lashed out against a group of people with a knife. He did plead guilty to this, as well as another charge of armed robbery in a different event. He was also arrested for stealing $250 worth of goods from a Home Depot in 2017, which got him a year-long sentence in jail. In that same year, he also received a 4-year prison sentence for a crime back in 2015. Taylor robbed a bank for $6,000. And remember that one bank teller that came face to face with the Route 91 bandit? Well, she stated that the most notable detail about the man were his striking blue eyes, and Taylor does indeed have blue eyes. Again, I can't seem to find what exactly happened to Taylor after he pleaded not guilty, but if it walks like a duck and sounds like a duck, you know. So if Taylor was found guilty in the end and was the Route 91 bandit, he walked away with well over $100,000 during his run from 21 to 22.